Good morning to everyone. My name is Ramesh, Assistant Professor, Department of Commerce, Soundarya Institute of Management and Science, Bangalore. Now I am going to explain. The subject is Quantitative Analysis for Business Decision 1 or Business Statistics, Bangalore University Syllabus, Unit number 4, Measures of Central Tendency. In this unit, I am going to explain to you what is measures of central tendency and dispersion types, merits and demerits of each dispersion types, and then how to solve the problems. First, what is measures of central tendency and dispersion? Here, first we will study about the dispersion. As the name suggests that the measures of dispersion showing the scattering of the data. That means the values which is scattering or collecting, grouping of values. That values will be in the form of same kind. Same kind values we will be making as one group. In that group there will be a maximum value, minimum value or middle value or any other values which is contained in the same kind, and then collecting the group. It tells the variation of the data from one another and gives clear idea about the distribution of the data. That is called measures of dispersion. The measures of dispersion shows homogeneity or the heterogeneity of the distribution of the observation. That should be in the same observations, then same kind of data will be observed or facts will be considered. Dispersion in simple way, Professor A.L. Bowley has defined dispersion is the measure of the variation of the items. What does it says? Dispersion is the measure of the variation of the items. Then Spiegel is defined the degree to which the numerical data tend to spread about an average value is called the variation. What does it says? Numerical data tend to spread. How far it is spreading from the group. Then what are the requisites required when you are studying the measures of dispersion? Good measures of dispersion should have the following properties. One is it should be simple to understand and rigidly defined. It will be properly defined and easy to understand. That should be maintained. Then that will make it very good in this learning structures. It should be easy to calculate or compare. We can compare one data to another data very easily. That is why the dispersion will explain here. It should be based on all items. It should be free from sampling distribution. Sampling distribution we'll study in the further years. So in that, free from that, it should be capable of further algebraic treatment. It is next level calculations or algebraic logical methods will be used. Which one? It is the measures of central dispersion. It should be remain unaffected by extreme items. Unaffected for the extreme item. Extreme item in the sense first values and last values on the given set of data. Then, what are the objectives of measures of dispersion? The following are main. What are that? To test the reliability of an average. Test the reliability of an average. Average is whether it is reliable or not when we are going to take a calculation. The variation measures is the only means to test the representative character of an average. If the scatter is large, average is less reliable. On the other hand, If the scatter is very small, average is typical value. Second one, to serve as a basis for control of variability. For that, measures of dispersion are indispensable to determine the nature and find the causes of variation. When these are known, it is easy to control the variation itself. This is the way the measures of dispersion serves basis for control of variability. To compare two or more series with regard to their variability. When we are getting a two different variability, then we can able to consider, look at here, the degree of uniformity of the consistency of data can be found out through study of measures of variation and dispersion. When comparing two series as regards the reliability of the averages, due considerations may be given to dispersion, which is a good basis for comparison. Which one? Measures of dispersion. Dispersion. This is two or more types of series. Variation is there. That how will you calculate based on that measures of dispersion to facilitate as a basis for further statistical analysis. In future, we will going to study in higher studies or any research work. If it is there, there will be dispersion activities or dispersion types will be used more. That's what we will say, facilitate as a basis for further statistical analysis. The measures of dispersion are essential tool for studying the statistical tools. It is a more important when you are going to study. For example, you can take whatever we studied in the last unit, mean median mode. The same thing we are going to use, that is called central tendency. That central tendency will be applicable and will be used for further algebraic applications. At the same time, statistical analysis will be used. Characteristics of dispersion. What are the characteristics will be followed here? Here, one will be used. Ideal measure of dispersion is expected to possess the following properties. What are the properties? It should be rigidly defined. That means properly defined. Any information will be expressed in the numerically or numbers in proper way will be defined. It should be based on all the items. Each and every items in the collection of the group that should be considered and value taken for the calculation purpose. It should not be unduly affected by extreme item. It's not unduly, not necessarily will never affect the extreme item. Extreme in the sense minimum value and maximum values. It should be lend itself for algebraic manipulation. Manipulation, algebraic means calculation, normal calculation, algebraic calculation in the sense some variable will be used and then simplified and solved by the particular values. It should be simple to understand and easy to calculate. All measures of the dispersion easy to understand and make you to calculate very easily. That purpose it is a measures of dispersion characteristics will be helpful. Classification of measures of dispersion. What are the different types is there? It will be categorized two types. One is absolute, another one is relative. First one, absolute measures of dispersion. Measures which express the scattering of observation in terms of distances. It says that range, quartile deviation. At the same time, mean deviation and standard deviation will come. The measures which express variation in terms of average, scattering observation or terms of distances, quartile and range. And then variation in terms of average of deviation, we'll talk about mean deviation and standard deviation. Relative measures of dispersion. We use the relative measures of dispersion for comparing distribution two or more set of data and for unit-free comparison. There are the coefficient of range, coefficient of mean deviation, coefficient of total deviation, coefficient of variation, coefficient of standard deviation. It is called the relative measure. It depends on the absolute value or absolute measures of dispersion. Then we'll talk about relative measures of dispersion. Depends on the absolute. There are two types. One is absolute measure of dispersion, second one is relative measure of dispersion. In this unit we are going to study both absolute measure of dispersion and then relative measure of dispersion. What are that absolute and then relative? Look at that. These are different types. One is range, coefficient of range, total deviation, coefficient of total deviation, mean deviation, coefficient of mean deviation, standard deviation, coefficient of variation. This is the absolute measure and relative measures. Relative measures always depends on absolute measure. Range. Now is the first part of the or first type of measures of dispersion. What are the measures of dispersion here? Range, total deviation, mean deviation, standard deviation. Now we are going to study about range. This is the first part of or first type of measures of dispersion. Range. Now we are going to study what is range, what are the formulas will be used, what are the merits and demerits, how to solve the problems. First one, it is the simplest way of definition. The range is the difference between lowest and highest values, maximum values and minimum values. In symbol we'll use range equal to L minus S. L is largest or highest, S will be smallest value. Where L equal to largest value, S equal to smallest value. In individual observation and discrete observation, L and S are easily identified. In continuous series, the following two methods are followed. Method 1, upper boundary of the highest class interval. Method 2, S, lower boundary of the lowest class interval. Method 2, middle value of the highest class interval L. Second one is middle value of the lowest class interval. When we are solving this problem, we will identify it. Here I said already, here each one we are going to study relative measure. Range L minus S, that is called absolute measure. Coefficient of range, it is called a relative measure. Here coefficient of range equal to L minus S divided by L plus S. Merits. It is simple to understand. It is very easy. Anyone if I say will be understand. Here we need to remember only maximum value is what, minimum value is what. Then we can able to find out range. That is the reason. Advantages is it is simple to understand. It is easy to calculate. Each one have different understanding format. Here we need to find out maximum value is what, minimum value is what. That is understood mean then you can able to follow and we can able to find out very clearly to the problems. In certain types of problems like quality control, weather forecast, share price analysis, etc., range most widely used. What is the range of yesterday and today? What is the stock market in maximum values when it is fallen, minimum values when it is fallen? What is the difference between? So those ideas will be used here. It's called merits of advantages. Demerits. Each one have merits and demerits, advantages and disadvantages. One is it is very much affected by the extreme items because the definition itself is this range, the difference between maximum value and minimum value. or you can see in this largest value and smallest value, then we can will defect or affected by extreme items. It is based on only two extremes observation, that's all. Middle value will not be considered, that's another drawback. It cannot be calculated from open and class interval. There is no upper limit as not mentioned in the first interval or last interval. In middle of the interval we cannot able to understand. We cannot able to find out which is the one. There should be first interval lower limit should be mentioned. Last interval upper limit will be mentioned. If it is not mentioned, range we cannot able to find out. It is not suitable for mathematical treatment because it is simple calculation. It is not giving any further relations. So here only range you can find out. What is the difference you can find out. That's it. Will be helpful. It is very rarely used measure. Very wherever it's required. That's it.